Happy Halloween, everyone. Are you ready to dive into some seriously spooky brain stuff?
It's Halloween, but we're not talking ghosts and goblins. We're talking about the ways our own brains can play tricks on us.
Yeah. And for this deep dive, we've got a couple of sources that are just going to blow your mind.
They're really interesting.
First up, we're going to be looking at some research about what happens when you stare at a mirror in a dimly lit room.
Yeah, it's called the mirror ghost illusion.
Ooh, spooky.
Yeah, it's not for the faint of heart.
Okay, so imagine this. You're in a dark room, you're staring at your reflection, and you've been staring for a little while, maybe a minute or so, and things start to get a little weird.
Yeah, that's when things start to get really interesting. People in this study started seeing all sorts of crazy stuff, distorted faces, ghostly figures, even animals or deceased relatives.
Wait, hold up. Are you saying that if I stare into a mirror long enough, I might see my grandma waving back at me?
Not exactly. It's not like a crystal clear apparition. It's more like these fleeting, shadowy figures that kind of emerge from the darkness. But still pretty creepy.
Okay, so creepy factor aside, what's the science behind this? Why does our brain decide to just turn our reflection into a horror movie?
Well, there are a few things going on here. First, there's the whole low light situation. When it's dark, our brains don't get as much information, so they they have to fill in the gaps and make assumptions about what they're seeing.
Oh, so it's kind of like when you think you see a monster under the bed, but it's just your backpack?
Exactly. Our brains are really good at detecting patterns, but they can also be a bit jumpy, especially in the dark.
So our brains are just playing like a spooky game of connect the dots with our reflections.
You could say that. And then it gets even weirder when you consider the Troxler effect. Basically, when you focus on something for a while, things in your peripheral vision start to fade away. Your brain's like, okay, nothing important over there, I'm going to ignore it.
So is that why parts of our reflection might start to disappear in the mirror?
Exactly. And remember how our brains love to fill in those gaps? Well, in this case, they might start plugging in those missing pieces with things like, I don't know, random patterns or things we're afraid of or, even faces we've seen before.
Okay, so this is getting seriously freaky, but there's more to this mirror thing than just spooky images, right?
Right. The researcher who studied this illusion, they found that it can actually mess with our sense of self-identity. Like you start to feel disconnected from your reflection, like you're looking at a stranger.
Ooh, okay, I've totally experienced that before. It's like, wait, is that really me? I look different.
Exactly. It's unsettling to say the least. And it just shows how easily our brains can be tricked, even when it comes to something as basic as our own face.
Okay, so we've established that mirrors can be kind of terrifying, but what about our own hands? Surely our brains can't mess with something as fundamental as our own body, right?
Well, get ready to have your mind blown because our next brain trick involves something called the rubber hand illusion.
Rubber hand illusion. Okay, that sounds a little less scary than ghostly mirror faces, but I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
All right, so picture this. You're sitting at a table, and one of your hands is hidden from view, and in front of you is a realistic-looking rubber hand.
Okay, seems harmless enough. No ghosts yet.
But here's where it gets wild. Someone starts stroking both the rubber hand and your hidden real hand at the same time with the exact same movements, and guess what happens?
I don't know. People start freaking out and run screaming from the room because they think the rubber hand is coming to life.
Not quite, though that would make for a good horror movie. What actually happens is that people start to feel like the rubber hand is their own.
Wait, seriously? They actually think a fake hand is part of their body. That's messed up.
It is. It's a classic example of how our brains can be tricked when it comes to something called body ownership.
Body ownership, is that like having a warranty on your limbs?
Haha, no. It's more about how our brains create the sense of what belongs to our body and what doesn't. And it's not as simple as you might think. It involves integrating information from all of our senses. Sight, touch, and even proprioception.
Proprio what now? That sounds like a complicated word for a very important concept.
It is. Proprioception is basically your sense of where your body is in space, even if you're not looking at it. Like, you can touch your nose with your finger, even with your eyes closed, right?
Yeah.
That's because your brain knows where those body parts are in relation to each other.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But how does all of this explain why people think a rubber hand is their own?
Well, think about it. In the rubber hand illusion, your brain is getting conflicting information. You see the rubber hand being touched, but you also feel your real hand being touched in the exact same way.
So it's like a sensory overload situation.
Exactly. And your brain, being the efficient machine that it is, tries to resolve this conflict by choosing the simplest explanation, which is that the rubber hand must be your real hand.
Wow, our brains are way more easily fooled than I thought. But is there any, scientific proof that this illusion actually works? Or is this just some kind of parlor trick?
Oh, there's proof, all right, and it comes from brain scans. Researchers use fMRI to see what was happening inside people's brains while they were experiencing the rubber hand illusion.
Okay, tell me more. Did their brains light up like a Christmas tree?
Not exactly, but the results were pretty wild. When people started to believe that the rubber hand was their own, the activity in the brain areas that control their real hand actually decreased.
Wait, what? So their brain was like, peace out, real hand. I'm hanging out with this cool rubber hand now.
Pretty much. It's like their brain was downplaying the importance of the real hand because it was confused by the sensory input.
That's both hilarious and terrifying. So what's the big takeaway here, besides the fact that I'm never going to trust a rubber hand again?
Well, the big takeaway is that our sense of body ownership isn't as fixed as we might think. It's constantly being shaped by our experiences and the information our brains receive from our senses.
So it's not like we're born with this, hardwired sense of this is my body and that's not.
Exactly. It's much more fluid and adaptable than that, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. It means we have the potential to change our relationship with our bodies and even incorporate new tools and technologies as extensions of ourselves.
Whoa, mind blown. But also kind of creepy. I mean, if our brains can be tricked into thinking a rubber hand is part of us, what else could we be convinced of?
That's a great question. And it leads us to one more spooky brain phenomenon that highlights just how adaptable our brains can be. Have you ever heard of phantom limbs?
Phantom limbs. Like the kind that people feel after they've lost a limb.
Exactly. It's a fascinating example of how our brains can hold on to a sense of body ownership, even when a part of our physical body is no longer there.
Okay, I am definitely creeped out, but also super curious now. Tell me everything.
Well, it turns out that even when a limb is gone, the brain can still create vivid sensations of it being there. It's like a phantom limb, a ghostly presence that can even feel pain or other sensations.
Wait, so even though the limb isn't physically there, the brain still acts like it is. That's wild.
It is, and there's a scientific explanation for it. You see, all brains have these sensory maps, kind of like a mini representation of our body laid out in the brain.
So like a Google Maps for our body.
Exactly. And even when a limb is lost, the corresponding area in the brain doesn't just disappear.
So the brain still has a memory of the missing limb, even though it's not physically there anymore.
Precisely. And sometimes that memory can be so strong that it creates the sensation of a phantom limb.
Wow. Our brains are stranger than fiction.
But how does this phantom limb thing tie back to the idea of body ownership?
Well, it shows that our sense of body ownership isn't just about what we can see and touch. It's also about these internal representations our brain creates. Those mental maps that tell us what's part of us and what's not.
So even when a part of our physical body is gone, our brain might still hold on to the idea that it's there. That's both amazing and kind of heartbreaking. It is, and it raises all sorts of questions about how our brains construct our reality and what happens when that reality is disrupted.
Deep divers, we've gone from spooky mirrors to rubber hand illusions to phantom limbs. And we're not done yet. Up next, we'll explore how scientists are using this knowledge about phantom limbs to help people who've lost limbs adapt and even regain some function.
Stay tuned. This is where it gets really fascinating.
Okay, deep divers. So we've been through a haunted house of brain tricks today. Spooky mirror reflections, phantom limbs.
Yeah.
But here's a question. What can science actually do to help people who are experiencing these phantom sensations, especially the pain?
Yeah, that's a good question, and thankfully one that scientists have been working on for years now.
Yeah.
And the good news is there have been some amazing breakthroughs.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of breakthroughs are we talking about?
One of the most promising approaches is called mirror therapy.
Mirror therapy. So we're going back to mirrors. I thought we agreed those were haunted.
I know, right? But this time the mirrors are being used for good, not for evil.
Okay, you've got me curious. How does this mirror therapy thing work?
It's pretty simple, but really effective. So let's say someone has lost an arm, and they might feel this phantom arm, and they might even experience pain.
Yeah, that's what I find so mind-boggling. The brain is sending these pain signals to a limb that's not even there.
Exactly. So with mirror therapy, the person sits in front of a mirror, and they position their remaining arm so that it's reflected in the mirror. where their missing limb would be.
Okay, I'm visualizing this. So they're basically looking at a reflection of their intact arm, but their brain is kind of tricked into thinking it's their missing limb.
Exactly. And here's the really amazing part. By moving their intact arm and watching its reflection, they can start to control the phantom limb sensations.
No way. So they're
Yep.
basically using their brain to like retrain itself, kind of like giving it a software update or something.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Like they're giving their brain this new visual feedback. And that can help reduce pain, improve mobility, even change the way the phantom limb feels.
That is incredible. So mirror therapy is basically hacking the brain's sensory system to give people back control.
You got it. And it all comes down to this concept of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change and adapt.
So cool. Okay, I'm really impressed by the power of the brain. We started this deep dive talking about spooky illusions, and now we're in this world of cutting-edge science and hope. That's pretty amazing.
It is. The brain is so complex, but the more we learn about it, the more we can unlock its potential.
Well said. All right, deep divers, that's about it for our spooky brain adventure. We learned that our brains can play some pretty freaky tricks on us, but also that we're learning more and more about how to harness the power of the brain to heal and adapt. Happy Halloween, everyone.